Hello, Year 10 Health. This video is obviously going to run you through the Term 2 scaffold for your assessment piece. It has some slight differences from last assessment, so I obviously wanted to create a video for you so you could get a little bit of understanding around what my words actually mean on a screen instead of just reading them yourselves. From this video, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to email me and I can explain this further and potentially even do another video with all the questions that you guys have for your assessment. So in this assessment that you guys have already broken down from lesson 1, you guys would have found that there is a lot less headings required for this task. And a few of the headings you previously have done in other reports, and there's some few new ones that we need to look at. Now, just going back from our last assessment piece, there were several people who were missing a few things in regards to reports. So I'm just going to reiterate what we're after. Reminder with reports is that every paragraph or section needs its own heading. And you also in this one will be required to put page numbers on your reports, as you are required to do a table of contents. So please make sure that every section has its own specific heading. Some of you lost marks in your last assessment piece just due to the fact of not having headings. Something super small that we all can fix straight away. Second thing is, in reports, you need to make sure that you are in-text referencing other people that you have found information from. Even if that is somebody who you've just looked at the website, read the information on the website, that website needs to be put into APA referencing and into your reference list. Because even though you did not use the information from that site, your mind takes that information in and uses it in a small way to adjust your writing. So any website that you look at for this assessment piece pretty much needs to be noted and applied to your reference list at the end. And then any website that you use throughout your assessment piece, not to write with, you need to make sure you are in-text referencing. If we have people who don't know how to in-text reference or don't know how to APA reference, I can find some videos and put that on the eLearn, but at this stage I assume you all know how to do this. If not, again, send us an email and I can get some of that happening. Alright, now, going back to this term scaffold, we obviously need to start with a title page. Very simply is you guys need to tell me the title of the assessment. It'll have something to do with mental health and use, but that's totally your choice on how you want to word it. You've obviously got to put your name, my name, and then a photo or an image of what's sort of happening. Alright, now moving on to an executive summary, which could be very new for a lot of people. It is basically an intro and a conclusion put together, or if you can think of a blurb on the back of all books that you read, it literally is a teaser as to what's going to happen in the assignment or the book. So ideally, you guys are giving me a very, very brief overview of what is going to happen in this report. So, as it says there, you need to describe the problem at hand, the desired outcome, and then you also need to describe the strategy that you use. So the strategy, it's probably should be worded best actually as your action plan. So what action plan do you use, pretty much? And all of the sub-dot points are pretty simple. They fall under what we're just saying there. Again, table of contents, you guys are well aware on how to create one of these. Very much self-explanatory, I would feel. Now, moving on to our introduction. This introduction is slightly a little bit different to the last one that we produced in term 1. This one probably will only contain a small amount of secondary data, and that secondary data might fall in around this burden of disease here. So secondary data probably links here. Reminder that secondary data for people who are struggling is a website or book of some sort, something that you can reference. Alright, so in the introduction, you need to define the issue clearly. So, what is the problem? Who is it affecting? So, this is your target audience. And as we already know from reading the assignment, it's about yous. So, yourself. Alright, burden of disease on the target audience. So, this burden of disease will probably be around stats and trends in regards to use. Right. Also, you need to state the issue, how the issue is going to be overcome. So that is all around potentially looking at how in this report you're going to combat the issue. So that's your action plan. And then what framework? So obviously we're speaking here of the, DOH, your Ottawa Charter. We're also looking at 2 new ones this assessment, so REAIM and the River of Life. Again, these 2 new frameworks that we are looking at, there'll be a video on them to explain it so that you guys get some information, and then some worksheets around it to obviously help yourselves with the information as well. Alright, so the introduction is small. When we do this report, ideally you want your report to look like a funnel. So you've got, in terms of information, it needs to be broad to start with, and then as we travel down the funnel, it gets smaller and smaller and smaller until we end up speaking about you. Right. Now, that's how the information flow we want to happen. This is how we want the report flow to happen. So, at the top we have our intro. As you can see, it's small, that's the tip. And then towards the bottom, we obviously have our plan for action. So as the report goes on, travels downwards, we want more words to be in our discussion and our plan for action than was in our intro. So our introduction should not be our biggest section of the assessment. Alright, now moving on to our discussion. So we are obviously collecting primary and secondary data like we did last assessment. The difference is with this time with your primary data is only going to be coming from you. So if you don't complete the primary data, you won't have any primary data. Now, if you look at the task sheet and you flip all the way through to your ISMGs, I want you to note how many times these ISMGs speak about primary data or the River of Life or anything, or Determinants of Health, because all of those are in connection to your primary data. So if you don't do your primary data, you won't be able to get a good mark. Alright, so you will be collecting primary and secondary data on the following. So trends on use. So now, trends. These generally happen to come from graphs and stats. This also can be done through words, but they generally come from graphs and stats. Alright. Your determinants of health, we have all should know about your determinants of health. If you are still struggling, refer back to the framework that is in the OneNote. You all have a copy of this in your OneNote, in your resources section of the collaboration space. please make sure you are referring to that document to make sure that you are talking about the right determinants of health. And another thing to reiterate is that our barriers and our enablers are connected to our determinants of health, but are not the same thing. Now, what I mean by this is that a barrier to obesity may be at our school that we don't have compulsory PE. Then my determinant of health is education. But I can't say that education is my barrier because that's not elaborated. Education can also actually be an enabler. So we cannot just state that education is our barrier or enabler. We have to give evidence to this. So give me the evidence. Education is the determinant of health that connects to obesity, but the barrier that affects obesity is that compulsory PE is not run at Southport State High. Now, you also need to make reference for this section. You are also going to be looking at the new framework. Now, we start looking at that in week 3. There will be a video on the River of Life, and there'll also be some scaffolding around it in week 3. So, please make sure that you watch the video and connect to it. That goes with the second point below, or the point below, I should say, with the personal, social, and community and the River of Life. Same thing. It's all going to be in the one video. So super important you watch that video and you understand the new framework. Alright, moving on to our next dot point. We start talking about, or you guys need to start talking about identifying and making judgments on the most significant individual and environmental determinants of adolescent mental health. So obviously we are talking about, in regards to this, we're talking about individual, that's you, and environmental, we are talking about obviously your environment. Now this will change for everyone depending on what you're involved in. So the environmental part will be very different, as well as your individual part. So this assessment is very much individual. You guys need to make sure that you collect your own primary data. There'll be parts that is very similar, but there'll also be parts that are different. So the way that I'll be able to judge that your assessments are different is from your primary data. Most of you will end up using very similar secondary data resources. Alright, in this section you also should be identifying the most significant. That is extremely important. So the most significant. So you need to filter the information and give me the most significant determinant of health to your issue. And you also need to tell me why your action plan will adjust this determinant of health. So it is all linked to each other. Just like when we talk about analyze, and there's two parts of it. Analyze, we have the first part, which is breakdown. And then we have relationship. This point is all about the relationships. You need to explain that. Explain the relationships for me. Why will your action plan work to adjust your most significant issue that is currently affecting you? Alright, moving on. We also need to elaborate on how resources used by use can have an effect on an individual's mental health, whilst linking to how the resource develops the personal skills of the Ottawa Charter. Alright, so remember, we will be needing to link to the Ottawa Charter, so that's another framework, which we're all well aware of. We used that quite a lot last term. Alright, we need to be elaborating, so resources. What I mean by resources is, I'm talking about, this could be Headspace, Beyond Blue, this could be like apps on your phone that track mental health. It could be education programs. So there will be several resources that you guys will need to research. There's a scaffold that's coming in, I think, week 3 as well, around all these resources, and you guys will be asked to identify them. But pretty much this point is saying that you need to elaborate why resources can have an effect on an individual's mental health and how specific resources can connect to develop personal skills of the other charter. Remember that this section of the charter, so developing personal skills, is all about, I know you're all saying it at home, but it's about education. Providing further education to an individual. How can we educate someone so they can make better choices for their health? Right, and then lastly in this section, you need to utilize the primary and secondary data that you've already obtained to identify the action plan that'll work for you. So tell me what the action plan you've implemented. So this is about implementing. You will get this information from when you analyze your primary data from your mood tracker that we do, and also you will analyze the action plan in regards to like how you feel during your time using the action plan, and then you'll analyze resources to explain why you specifically implemented this plan. So this is all about you. So you need to implement a plan that's going to suit you. So Beyond Blue and Headspace, just because they're a website, you might not use that. That's not very effective. You might be someone who sits on their phone every day, and an app before you go to bed is best for you, and that's the one we want you to implement. We want you to implement something that potentially has the ability to give you further education. Alright, and then lastly, you're going to justify how it's developed your personal. I know obviously this assessment is a lot about you, but we still want you to be writing it in the third person. Right. Moving on. We are talking for a plan of action. So this might be new to some of you guys as well. This is certainly something that is rare to only specific subjects and specific reports, so some of you might not have done this. But in your plan for action, you pretty much need to briefly explain your personal action strategy. Reminder, you've already done this, so you don't want to be repeating yourself. You just want to give 1 or 2 sentences just to refresh my memory on what exactly your strategy or your action plan is. Alright, you then want to evaluate your own action strategy using the RE-AIM framework. Again, this is one of those new frameworks, so there will be information on that, and that'll come in about week 4, I believe. You only need to pick 1 or 2 components of the model, so we want you to be in depth in the ones that you pick. So you might only pick 1 but do it at a really good level, and that is perfectly fine. Or you might pick 2. What we don't want is we don't want superficial analysis or justification from the framework. Alright, now you also need to justify how the implemented plan links to the Ottawa Charter action area of developing personal skills to create a positive mindset around your personal mental health. So you need to say pretty much how has your action plan helped you develop education, your own. In relation to mental health. Has to be in relation to that. So it's not about developing your education around the app. It's around developing your education around mental health. Alright, and then you need to justify which health promotion technique the Ottawa Charter, your implemented plan, utilises, and what it could do if you continue to use it in the future. So you need to make a recommendation for the future. So if you continue to use this action plan for the rest of your life, what would be that outcome? And then we also want you, in this section, we want you to tell us which part does your or your action plan strategy relate to. Are you advocating for mental health? So you're giving yourself favourable conditions through advocacy, or are you mediating, where you are creating, you're providing opportunity for yourself within your community to pursue overall health, or are you enabling, giving yourself the ability to take control of your own health, your own mental health? Most of you and your action plans will fall under this one, enable. So you will generally be, obviously, enabling yourself to give you more control. This is generally by you doing something. Now, that might not be true for everybody, but that's my general thought process, is most of you will fall under the enable banner. If you feel like you don't, can you please make sure that you contact me? Enable will probably be the easiest for you to write about. All right, there you have it. That is our scaffold for your Term 2 assessment. Now, I know I went through that very quickly and there is a lot of gibberish now on the scaffold. Can you please email me if you have any questions, because if I get more than one question on the same topic, I'll create another video for yourselves so that you guys can understand it, or I'll just email each person individually with their questions that they have. Hope you're enjoying the online learning. I know I am not. I cannot wait to be back in class. So have a good day, guys. Enjoy this new assessment piece.